I'm Brenda. Welcome back to Brenda's Quilt Room. Today I'm going to show you the next block of the month that we're going to be doing, and it's called the Dutchman's Puzzle. Now, I have always really liked this block, but I've actually never made one until today. It's made up of 8 flying geese units. And you may have seen a flying geese unit before, but it looks like the goose would be the dark fabric that's in the middle, pointing, and the wings. And typically, when you make flying geese, they typically will be sewn together. The point is at the bottom of the goose in front of it, because geese fly in formation. So anyway, we're going to jump in and get started. I want to tell you what you're going to need to make this block. To make one block, you're going to need 2 7 1/4 inch squares, and then you will need 8 4-inch squares. So this is what I have prepared. Here's my 7 1/4 inch square. And I have here, and there'll be 4 of the 4-inch squares to go with one of your 7 1/4 inch blocks. And I've already drawn on the back of each one, you will draw a diagonal line down the middle. I drew my 1/4 inch sewing line on each side of the diagonal just for you so that you could see it. And you're going to place your light fabric. Typically your darker fabric is your goose. You're going to place one of these 4-inch squares in the corner of your 7 1/4 inch block, and then pin the edges down so that it doesn't shift. You're going to take another 4-inch block and put it in the opposite corner and pin it in place as well. It just keeps things, if you pin, it keeps things from shifting. Now, right here in the middle, we have these the two squares they should line up fairly good together. That's a little bit better right there. And I'm going to pin this back down on each side. And then I'm going to place one pin right here across the middle as I get toward the end. Of course, I won't stitch over my pin. I'll pull that out to hold it in place. And so what we're going to end up doing is we're going to stitch down each side of the diagonal line, and then we're going to cut these 2 units apart. So let me come over here and sew that. It's amazing that it's already the month of May. Time just goes by so quickly. Take my pin out. And you do need to sew with a very accurate 1/4 inch seam on this block. I've always wanted to make a Dutchman's puzzle quilt, and I don't know, our to-do list just seems to get longer and longer, and I never have made some of these old traditional blocks that I've always admired. So today we're going to make one together. and you only have to make 2 of these blocks. Okay, take my pins out, and we will cut. We're going to cut these 2 sections apart. Okay, and now this is what it looks like. You're going to take it, when you fold these out, it almost to me looks like a butterfly. And then you could just lightly crease that with your fingernail and go over it. It sort of looks like a heart too, but I kind of thought it looked like a butterfly. This is called the no waste method of making flying geese units. So now you're ready to take your next square, put it in the corner diagonally so that it comes up, the point comes up between these 2 that sort of looks like the head of a butterfly. That might be a way for you to remember how to put your block together. Is you need a little butterfly head there in the middle. And we're going to stitch exactly the same way that we did in the beginning. We're going to sew down each side of the diagonal line, and we're going to do both of these units that way. So fold your half square triangle now that you have on there. You can fold that back, crease it with your fingernail. Try not to pull on it too much. We don't want to stretch it out of shape. And then line up your next square. And we'll pin it down. And go back to the sewing machine. And we'll sew these 2 down. And cut them apart. I hope that you're having a good time and not stressing too much over trying to complete your blocks. I wasn't extremely happy with the first block that I made, and like I said, I've never made this particular block before. I've always wanted to, I just never, for whatever reason, there's always something else more important to do. I've never made this before, so I did practice with a second one, and I was really happy with how well it worked and came together. There's that one. And then we'll do the second one. I'm not trying to do any kind of a quilt square block that's got too high of a degree of difficulty, especially if you're just beginning and getting started with quilting or sewing. Try not to throw anything out there at you that's too hard and going to cause anybody any amount of stress. And if it helps you, you could draw your seam lines on there just to make sure that, you know, they're accurate. And so we're going to cut these apart, and then I will show you how we get our flying geese. So just lay your ruler corner to corner, hold down and press it. It's a little thick there in the middle. And one more time. Okay, same thing. These are our 4 units, and it takes 8 of these to make the block. Just peel back, run your fingernail just ever so lightly. Once you press it, it really does want to stay in that shape. And so now what I do, I line up the end of my goose on my mat on a line. And right here, the tip, let me use a pen to point that out. This is the tip of your goose. You want to be sure that you have 1/4 of an inch seam allowance from the tip of the goose over to the edge, so that when you sew your units bottom to bottom together, that you don't sew over and cut off the top of your goose tip. You want to be sure and keep the tips. So I made my squares at 4 inches, a little bit bigger than what the pattern called for, because I would rather trim away and have extra. So I'm just lining up my ruler, and I'm making sure by looking at my ruler that I have this 1/4 inch. I have a good 1/4 of an inch away from the top of my goose. And I'm just going to trim this little bit off. Okay? Now I'm going to do that to all 4 of these. And so we'll just press that back a little bit. Oh, also you do need to cut your little dog ears off of the ends, the little points. It's kind of sad that they call those dog ears, but that's what I've always known it to be called. And so I'm going to make sure that I've got my 1/4 inch on there from the edge. I want to make sure that it looks good. Okay. And we'll just trim that little bit off. And there's my second unit. Here's the third one. This is the reason this is called the no waste method of making flying geese, is because there's another method. And I don't mind doing the other method, which is like a stitch and flip. But I don't like to waste my fabric. I try to get as little waste out of a project as possible, because you're spending probably a fair amount on your fabric. And I just hate for some people love sewing with little tiny bitty pieces of scraps, but I just try not to waste anything. So there you see, I trim those off, and I've already put part of this together. So now I have my other 4 units, and they will be sewn with they'll be sewn like this. The tip of your goose goes toward the bottom of the goose in front of it. And so that's how we're going to sew these together. Now, the reason that I was so careful to make sure I don't want to lose the tip of my goose on the back here, right here, if you can see the little X right there, that is where the tip of your goose comes together. So when you sew, you want to be sure that you're crossing right there exactly in the middle, or you're a little bit to this side. That way you don't cut the top of your goose off. So we're going to sew these together. There's that one. And there's the second one. And I'm a big pinner. Some people don't use pins, but I do. I like things to try to be as accurate as possible. Like I said, this was the first one that I did. And I wasn't as happy with the first one as I was the second one, which I will show to you in just a minute. So we're sewing. And I'm going to be really careful as I get toward the tip of that goose. We'll see how good I did. After we get these together, we'll see how it came out. You can use these flying geese units. They're used in a lot of different blocks. And they're really pretty. I think they are. Okay, let's see. Now when you press these, you want to press where there's the least amount of bulk. So if you press backward along the bottom of the goose that's on the top, I don't know if you can see that because it's black, but I did not lose the tip of my goose. It's right there. So let's look at this one. Oh, that one's even better. That one even has a little tiny bit of space right there. So those will be great. And I'll press them down. Now, when I say no waste, I want to give you an example of the waste of the fabric. I thought to myself, well, maybe I should show them another way if they don't want to make their flying geese units this way, the no waste method. So I cut some squares, some rectangles and squares. And these are the two geese that I made. And the method is called stitch and flip. And so with the square on top of the rectangle, this would have been on the bottom. This would have been part of the rectangle. And then this would be the part of the fabric folded back that you lose. And so in cutting away to keep your 1/4 inch seam allowance, this much fabric was lost. Now, if you like stitching lots of little half square triangles like this together, that might be the preferred method for you. But for me, if I was going to make a quilt completely out of all of these blocks, having to cut 4 of these, or you would actually have 8 because it takes 8 flying geese units to make one block, that's just a little too much waste for me. And so I decided I'm going to stick with this method. And let me show you how you're going to lay out your block. You're going to lay them out in a clockwise motion. So these geese are flying up. These are sideways. The next one will come down. And then this one will go this way. So if you can see in the middle, it forms this great big pinwheel. So I sewed these two together. And now I need to sew these two together this way. So back over to the sewing machine. And there's no real seams to match on these, which is really nice. I mean, they're sometimes a little bit bulky where you have to sew over the seam of the goose piece. But they go together. It's just, it makes a great big 4 patch that you put together. And then your block is finished. So this one goes down, this one goes sideways, and we will sew this one on top of this one in the middle. This seam, this middle seam is going to the right, so I want my seam on the bottom to be going to the left. So I'm going to put a pin in there because we want to make sure that those nest really nice. And back over to the machine. And I think that seam wants to go the other way. There we go. Make sure my seams are lined up the way that I want them to be. It's a little thick there in the middle, but I have one more little trick to show you when we're finished with the block, how to get it to lay down really nice and flat. Okay. There we go. Well, okay. So now, here's your block. And you see how this makes this pinwheel in the middle. On the back, in the center, I don't have a seam ripper, but there's like a little thread there. And if you will, these seams will naturally want to lay down. Of course, I don't have my little seam ripper with me. There's that little connecting thread there in the middle. And if you will give it like a little tug, it'll open up and lay down, and it makes a little tiny pinwheel. I don't know if you can see that very well. This little bitty pinwheel. And if you will mash that down with your thumb, and then when you press, the seams of this one are wanting to go this way, this way, this way. Your block is going to lay nice and flat. And you can see how that flattened out the puffiness of the middle of this one. It's kind of hard to see with the black and the white, but let me show you the second block that I did, and I've pressed it out. Look at how nice the center of the pinwheel came out. And here's the back, and you can see a little bit better the little pinwheel that makes in the center. There's a little connecting thread there, and if you'll just pull out those first like 3 stitches, it'll just lay nice and flat. And then I trimmed it up to a 12-inch square. Now, you watched me trim this white off when I was trimming my flying geese. This little pile right here, when I trimmed this up to a 12-inch square, this is all that I trimmed off of this block right here when I trimmed it down to 12 inches. So there's like no waste on these blocks. And you can see there's 3, there's the 15. I literally took the ruler that I had because it's 6 inches wide and it's like 12 inches long, and laid it to the side and just trimmed all the way around. And I'm just thrilled with how wonderful this came out. I've never made one of these blocks before. I've always wanted to. I just, for whatever reason, never have. So I hope that you will enjoy making your 2 Dutchman's puzzle, your 8 flying geese units for the month of May. So I hope you're having a good time putting your blocks together. And until next time, we'll see you later.